Welcome back, everyone, for the last talk of this track of today. This feels kind of sad. Like, I don't want to leave y'all yet. But maybe I'll meet some of you at the in person event tomorrow and the day after. That'd be really fun. I'll be room hosting there as well on Friday. So join me in whatever hall I am at that point because I really don't know. And also, I give a talk tomorrow morning. So if you're one of those people that gets up early, you should definitely come and visit me for my talk. But now for Catalin's talk, because that's why we're all here. So Catalin is the CEO of Adaptive.Run and a leading expert in app development and cloud computing, with several years of experience working on international enterprise projects all around the globe. And in this session, he promised us that we will learn how valuable data insights from text and audio can be extracted with the help of Azure, artificial intelligence, and cognitive services. So, Catalin, the stage is yours.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the warm introduction. And yes, since I'm the one which will be closing off the stage, I guess for the next 45 minutes, I ask you pleasely to bear with me because we will see some cool stuff. So you've probably seen already that I only have 4 slides. It will be pretty interactive. What we're going to do next, it will basically be a live demo in which we will build a small and simple application in which we will see how artificial intelligence can really ease up our job regarding certain stuff. And at the end, of course, when we have the Q&A, we can also talk about certain use cases, business use cases in which this might be applicable, because I've seen it in my past experience in some of my past projects already implemented and bringing business value to some of the companies. But enough with the talk. Let me quickly present myself just so you know who is speaking in front of you. As already mentioned, my name is Catalin Popa. I have several years of experience, 10 years actually of experience with cloud, with Azure, Microsoft Azure fully. I'm a Microsoft MVP as well. And as already mentioned, yeah, I've been implementing mostly large enterprise projects, cloud enterprise projects all around the world, but also government projects, all of them based on Azure. And since 2019, I've been dealing a lot with projects which are related to artificial intelligence and basically bringing this digital transformation to whoever company wants to actually get all of these benefits from the Azure cloud. As for the solution that we're going to build today, as I said, it will be pretty interactive. Basically, this is kind of the sketch. It will be pretty simple. We will build an application, a console application, in which basically it will record what we are speaking, right? That speech that it will be recorded will be transformed into text, right? So it will be basically a speech to text transformation. And then based on that text, we will do some sentiment analysis. What does that mean? It basically means that depending on what I'm saying, we will put a label on that specific phrase. It will either be positive, it will either be negative, it will either be neutral. And of course, we will have some percentages to actually get the real feel of how neutral, how negative, how positive that might be. And also, of course, we will do a bit of text analytics to see what are the key phrases that have been mentioned into that phrase, right? What are the specific entities that have been identified with the help of artificial intelligence and so on and so forth, right? So, as I said, it will be pretty interesting. So, enough for it. Let's go into Azure. Probably some of you guys are familiar with it. If you're the first time seeing it, this is basically the Azure portal. It's kind of the most usual way in how you create things into the Microsoft Cloud, into Azure, right? And here I have a resource group, which is called Dev Days 2023, right? In which I will build 2 simple resources that will help us to actually build our application, right? So I'll get pretty quick on it, and I'll search first for the speech resource, this one from Microsoft, right? Creating one is pretty simple. Some of you guys probably already did it. It basically just asks you for the region in which you want to build it as data center, right? Microsoft, I guess, data center, and then a name for it. Let's name it Dev Days 2023 speech, something like that. Right? And then I'll go with the pricing tier. I'll choose standard just for the sake of having all of the features, right? From a networking perspective, I won't mind that. Of course, if you want to, at some point isolate your resource and to only accept requests from specific virtual networks or specific IPs, you can do that. We're not going to get into that at the moment. We're going to build it fully publicly so that we can actually see all of the benefits from an artificial intelligence perspective, not from a security perspective, right? Cool. Going further, let's review and create it. Usually takes a few couple of seconds, honestly, so it shouldn't take more than a minute. Let's see how it goes. See, already there. That's good. Now, if I look into my resource group and I'm not caching information, presumably I should see my resource right here, Dev Days 2023 speech as a speech service, right? As any cognitive service that you build in Azure, you're going to see that it's a pretty simple and basically black box solution that you can use. What does that mean? It basically means that it gives you an endpoint, right? And it gives you some keys which you can use to actually make some API calls to this artificial intelligence, right? So all of these predefined artificial intelligence cognitive services that you find in Azure are actually kind of some black boxes in which some machine learning algorithms, right, have been trained so that you can, of course, make some API calls to get some results. Basically, you send something into your request, like an image or, of course, an audio file, because we're speaking about a speech service, and then you get back a result depending on which API request you're going to do. But we're going to see it in a second, no problem. And let's create a second one as well, because if I go back to my diagram, we're basically covering with the service only this part in which we're doing speech to text, right? Let's also create a service that will cover this part, which basically from the text, we're extracting key phrases, entities, and also doing sentiment analysis, right? And for that, I'm going to search for something which is named a language service. Same thing. It's pretty easy to create, honestly, right? If I'm going here, it will ask me about the region. Let's name it Dev Days 2023 Text Analytics or something like that. Again, I'm going to go on the pricing tier, which is the standard one. The difference between the pricing tiers, you probably already know that. It's basically on how many transactions you can do and, of course, how much they cost. Networking-wise, we're not going to boggle our minds with it. Let's see what I missed. Sorry for that. I accept that I am responsible for my artificial intelligence. Sorry for that. And then let's create it. Again, should be pretty fast, pretty straightforward. Let's see. Okay, just a couple of seconds more. And then afterwards, after this is created, we're basically going to have our infrastructure in which we will, our infrastructure services, if you want to call it like that, which we'll use for our application. Now, our application, until it gets built, right? So, okay, it's already built. We're not going to build some application into the cloud. It will basically be just some console application. It will run locally just for the sake of demonstrating these capabilities. But again, just keep in mind that from an artificial intelligence perspective, right, these are kind of the services that you need to use in case you want to use, of course, something related to speech or something related to language, right? So these are my two services. We're pretty good on it. If I look at the text analytics one on the language one, sorry, it's kind of the same. It gives me an endpoint. It gives me some keys, right, which I can use to basically make API requests towards the Microsoft Cloud, towards Azure, so that I can get the full benefits of this cognitive service that I have in Azure, right? Cool. Now, let's get to the fun part, and let me open Visual Studio because we're going to do a bit of development, right? And let's create a new project. Let's create a new project, a console app. As I said, something really simple. I'm just going to name it console app 1. Okay, let's call it Dev Days 2023 console app, whatever. Doesn't really matter. Puppets 6 should be okay. Again, I'm usually a .NET developer, so sorry for that, but it can be in any language. So what you're seeing here in terms of what I'm building, it can be Java, it can be in Python, it can be in .NET, it can be in basically any language, because at the end of the day, these resources that you're seeing here, as I said, it will be basically just some API requests that I'm going to do to these services, right? And based on the response that I get back, I'm basically just going to build my application outwards, right? So don't worry about the language if you're not necessarily a Microsoft-ish type of developer, right? Which is used to .NET. It can be any type of language at the end of the day, because again, it's basically just making some API requests to these services that I built right here. Cool. I'm gonna delete this hello world because we're gonna be doing a bit more complicated things than that. And before I get started to it, I'm gonna add myself some NuGet packages just to make my life easier a bit, right? I mean, I can do those API requests without these NuGet packages as well, right? It can be a simple request no matter what. But for the sake of it and making it more, making it faster, I'm gonna install Azure Cognitive Services Speech. I've mistyped something. Sorry for that. Services. There is, right? The one from Microsoft, you can see it's Microsoft Cognitive Services Speech. Yes, this is the one. Sorry, let me search for it. Microsoft Cognitive Services. Let me see all of them. Probably easier that way. This one. This is what I'm looking for. The one which has 1.21 million downloads, right? I'm gonna install it for my project. It's basically just an SDK that you can use with that service that they built in Azure, right? Okay, that was pretty fast. And also, I'm going to do the same one for the other thing. It's called Azure AI Text Analytics something. This one, also from Microsoft. You can basically see it pretty quickly, right? Let's do the same thing. Let's install it. Yeah, no problem. I accept it. And now I have my NuGet packages as well, and I can start coding. Now, from a coding perspective, we're not going to build the full code because it will probably take a bit, but I already have the full code right here. I'm going to explain it to you bit by bit what's actually happening into this bit of code, right? So we're going to recreate our own because some of the things here might not work. But at the end of the day, the application kind of looks like this. Let me show it to you guys. Right, so it's a simple console app. This is what we're aiming for to build again, right? It asks me for a language like English, French, Spanish, German, or Romanian. That's my native language, sorry. And then as soon as I choose my language by just, pressing one of the numbers, as soon as I speak, right, it will basically record what I'm speaking, and then it will make an analysis of that specific sound, right? So let me demonstrate to you. It's probably easier. This is a test to see if the application really works. Right, so you can see that basically it recorded what I've just spoken, right? It basically transformed my speech into text, and then based on what it was transformed, it basically does some kind of sentiment analysis, right? It tells me that the sentence is mostly neutral. It's kind of 84% neutral, right? 40% positive. And then it tells me some of the key phrases or entities that have been discussed into that specific phrase, right? I was talking something about a test and about an application. And it works with any kind of language, right? I only have like 5 languages here because that was the application that I built really quickly to demonstrate it. But yeah, it can work with I think it's supported for 180 languages at the moment. So I'm pretty sure that whatever language you speak, I'm pretty sure that's supported as well. So don't worry about it. But enough about that. Let's create our own one. And I'm going to copy paste some of the things. Basically, I'm going to start off with some of the libraries. And I'm going to build a namespace. And then, of course, the program class. And then the first thing I'm going to do, although I don't really recommend it to you guys because you're probably better developers than me, is to have some static variables, right? Private static variables right here, which will point to the endpoint and the key credential that you have for text analytics. If you remember, for our specific resources that we built, these are slightly different from the application that I currently used. So the endpoint will be this one right here, right? In which it should be something like that. While the key should be this one, right? Okay, and then I can presumably start building my main task, right? In which to build that really simple menu in which I have to choose, of course, between English, French, Spanish, German, and so on and so forth. I'm basically doing some console write lines. Now, again, I know that's not the best approach from a dev perspective, but just for the sake of demonstrating it, that's probably the fastest way. Let's just demonstrate, for example, today, let's just demonstrate English, French, and Spanish. Probably easier that way. Right? Reason why I'm doing that is because for each language that I have here, I'll need to have a function at a certain point, right? And then based on that, based on what I'm going to choose in the same application, if I'm choosing one, I'm going to execute a certain function. If I'm choosing two, I'm going to execute a certain function. If I'm choosing three, I'm going to execute a certain function, and so on and so forth. Again, not the best approach. You can have a general function for all of them, and then just specify the code of the language based on what you chose right here. But again, just for the sake of demonstrating it, it's probably the easiest way for you guys to understand as well. So because I only have 1, 2, and 3, let's just keep 1, 2, and 3 right here. We're going to do English, French, and Spanish, right? And for the moment, I'm going to close my main task. Let's do that. Right? And then I'm going to show you guys how this function needs to look like, right? So here, it should look like this. Recognize speech async in English, right? Basically, what the function does is the following thing. So let's deep dive into it a bit, because basically that's the most interesting part of the application, more or less. If you remember, we installed that NuGet package at a certain point, and we want to make use of it, right? So basically, this function makes use of that NuGet package for the speech part, and this function will basically take care of that speech to text transformation that you've just saw earlier, right? So whenever I'm going to speak, this function, based on, of course, what I'm choosing right here from a main console perspective, right? It's going to basically take my what I've just spoken. It will going to transform it into speech. How does that really happen? Well, first of all, I need to set up some configurations, right? The config variable, in which here I need to specify through this function speech config from a subscription perspective, right? I need to specify exactly the other key that I have in my speech service, right? Which will be this one. And then, of course, just a region. You don't need to make use of the endpoint, because the endpoints for a speech service are general. So whatever speech service you're going to build, you're going to see that the endpoint, it's always the same. West Europe API, cognitive.microsoft.com, whatever, and so on and so forth. So it's not specific as the ones that you build for language, for example, right? In which you have dev days, the name of your resource, right? .cognitiveservices.azure.com. For speech, because it's kind of a more generalistic service, that's how Microsoft built it. You'll have this general endpoint, so it's not necessarily needed to specify it in the config, right? And then as soon as that is configured based on that config, we're going to use this function, which is called speech recognizer, right? And then based on that function, we're basically going to await to see what I'm speaking in my to my device mostly. And then based on that device, I'm going to get the result back, right? So depending, of course, on these use cases that I have right here, in case I recognize the speech, or in case I have no match, or in case I cancel at a certain point the process, right? I'm going to get my result. Eventually, the speech to text transformation. So basically what I'm speaking with this part in a text mode, right? Or if I get some kind of error, I can see that my process was canceled, or my speech will not be recognized, and so on and so forth. So simple use cases basically of what's happening here, right? For the moment, let me do the following. Let me delete this just to make it in English level, right? And I just want to demonstrate to you guys basically the part in which we only have speech to text, right? And then I need to close the namespace as well. And presumably now I have a simple but yet efficient application, which just basically does speech to text. Let's see if it works. Here it is. Right, so I can choose between English, French, and Spanish. I don't have the French and Spanish version for the moment yet coded. I only have English one, so let's give it a test. This is yet another test to see if speech-to-text works in my new application. Okay, so you can see that basically my speech-to-text is working properly. It basically recorded what I've said and transformed it into text. So it's pretty nice. Let's do the same thing with French as well. Basically here, I'm going to add again those two lines, which will do the same thing for French and for Spanish, right? And then I'm going to have the exact same function as I have it right here, but only from Spanish. I'm going to show you guys what's the difference between the English one and the Spanish one. It's just a simple parameter, right? This is the French one. This is the Spanish one as well. If you take a look into it, you'll see that the only difference between English, for example, and French is just that whenever I use the speech recognizer function, which is from my NuGet package, right, I'm specifying also the country code, right, that I want to use at that specific point, right? So because it's French here, I'm going to specify FR -FR, right? And for Spanish, it will be ES, right, from Spain, and so on and so forth, right? So for English, I don't do it because, of course, English is kind of the default standard language, right? But you can do it here as well if you really want it. You can specify English, right? Something like that. But because it's default, you don't really need it. So for French, it's going to look the same. It's going to be the exact same function, but with only this minor difference. And of course, I'll have to put this new value into my speech config just to make sure it works, right? So if I save it now, it's going to be basically working for 3 languages. Let's test again. Let's do progressive testing, more or less. Let's choose Spanish. I don't know. Let's see how my Spanish actually works at this point. Me llamo Fernando y yo quiero comer manzanas. Yeah, there you have it. Basically, I just said that my name is Fernando and I want to eat apples. But I think that's a translation, right? But as you can see, it works pretty well, right? It works also for Spanish and probably it works also for French as well. Good. So from our diagram, if you want to call it like that again, we basically covered this part, right? We do speech to text. It's pretty good. Works like a charm, no problem. Now let's get to the second part in which we're going to build, of course, some functions in which we do also this sentiment analysis and this key phrase extraction from the text itself, right? Because nowadays, what we just did, we basically speak, we have the text. Let's see what we can extract from that. And for that, going back to my main application, right? I'm going to do the same thing, but this time I'm going to use the credentials that I've basically saved right here in these static variables, right? The endpoint and the credentials, right? So that I make sure I use these exact values. And then based on that, I'm gonna use some new functions, right? So bear with me a second. Let me see what I just did, just to make sure I did the correct thing. Sorry for that. Here it is. Right, based again on what I'm choosing, let's do it just for English and French. Sorry for that. I'm doing the exact same thing as I'm doing for speech, but with the different functions nowadays, right? So if I choose English, based on the text that I just extracted from here, right? Because this is basically saving the text that I'm extracting from my speech. I'm sending this text to a new function, which I've not defined yet, of course, right? And then basically I want to do this sentiment analysis at a certain point, right? So because we don't have it defined, let's also do that as well to see how it goes. And for that, I'm going to first demonstrate the English one, right? So I'm going to add a new function right here in which it basically, of course, expects some inputs. the client basically being the credentials in which you need to use to actually use that Azure service, right? The endpoint and of course the key, the credential. So this is the client that you need to input into the function, and then the input text, it will basically be, of course, the text that we extracted from our speech. It can be any text. You can extract it from some post on Twitter, or you can extract it, I don't know, from your messages or emails that you have on your device. It can be literally anything, right? But for the sake of example, we're going to just use the text that we've extracted with speech. Now, what's happening here? It's basically kind of the same idea, but of course with different functions, because we're using the other NuGet package that we just installed, right? Basically, we're going to use this function, which is called analyze sentiment. And based on the credentials that we have, we're going to basically analyze the sentiment of that text that we're inputting right here, right? So based on the response, of course, we're going to, again, output some things. If the analysis of the sentiment is done correctly, then we're basically going to see the text that has been analyzed. It will see the sentiment. It will be the positive score, the negative score, and the neutral score, of course, in percentages, so that we can see, of course, what we're really talking about, right? So really simple, just a few lines. That's for English. Let me do it for French and Spanish as well. The only difference, again, you probably guessed it. And again, this is not the best approach from a dev perspective, but I'm doing it like this so that you guys can actually see the difference code-wise, that it's really minimal when it comes to changing languages, right? You'll see that in English, this is the function. In French, it will be the same function with the only difference that, again, you're going to specify the country code, right? For French, it will be FR, and for Spanish, it will be this one, right? So I think we're pretty good. This basically means that whatever I'm now speaking to my application, I'm going to record it, I'm going to transform it into text, and then after I transform it into text, I'm going to have some sentiment analysis as well, right? Let's see how it goes. This is the third test to see if sentiment analysis works. Okay. Right, so this is my basically the thing that I just spoken, and then the analysis goes like that, right? This is the response. Same thing goes. Probably you got the point by now. It's pretty redundant when I'm showing to you guys, but I think practice makes perfect. Let's go like that. We're gonna do the same thing, of course, with the key phrase extraction. If you remember from my initial demonstration, there was that little last tiny part which was telling me the main subjects, the main entities that I'm talking about in my phrase, right? So we're going to add that as well. Basically, that part will be exactly the same, in which with another function, let me just do it again for French and Spanish. With another function that we're going to define, we're going to send again the same text. We're going to use the same credentials from our language service that we have in Azure. And of course, we're going to get some output, right? So basically the exact same thing. Let me minimize these a bit. And let's do key phrase extraction. This. Let me add here. Sorry, I'm doing stupid stuff. Yep. Here it is, right? So key phrase extraction. Oh, my bad. There it is. Better. Easier to structure my code like that. Okay. So key phrase extraction, the exact same idea and principle as the sentiment analysis, because we're using the exact same NuGet package, right? We're using a different function, of course, which is specific for extracting key phrases, which pretty intuitive. It's called extract key phrases, in which you have to input, of course, the text to actually do that and use some client credentials to actually do it. And then based on that, of course, we're outputting the response, right? For each value that we have in the response, for each key phrase, we're going to basically be listing it, because it might be you have multiple key phrases, right? The response is usually an array as value, right? That you might get. It might be one, it might be multiple, depends. But just to make sure we're covering all of them, we're doing this for each right here, right? Same thing. You probably got it by now. I'm going to do French and Spanish. Again, the only difference will be the country code for France. The only difference for Spanish, again, only the country code. And there you have it. We kind of have our full initial solution recreated, backtracked, if you want to put it. Let's see how that looks like. Right. So again, English, French, Spanish. Let's do English one more time. I want to visit London sometime soon. Okay, cool. And as you can see, does the speech to text. It does basically a sentiment analysis in which is pretty neutral what I'm saying, pretty positive as well, 15%. And it basically finds out that I'm talking about London. Now I'm giving here really small demos, right? It can be a really big text at a certain point. So don't imagine you just have to do one sentence. And even so, just for the sake of example, I've done it. I'm doing this demo with pre-recorded messages, right? Because first I'm speaking, and then I'm taking that pre-recorded audio, more or less, and then I'm sending it for the analysis. That's how my application works at the moment. But you can do it in real time as well. So if you ever see nowadays in, I know, certain conferences, even at the UN, I'm doing a bit of advocacy for Microsoft as well, right? All of those real-time speech to text or language to language translations, right, that are happening in certain major events. Just keep in mind that somewhere in the back end, it might be some of these services that you're seeing right here. And some of the people who implemented that are basically using these kind of cloud technologies to actually do that. Right. Cool. Let's demonstrate it one more time for the other languages as well, just for the sake of it. I don't know. Let's do French. I'm not a really good French speaker, but let's see how it goes. Je m'appelle Marcel et j'habite à Paris. Okay. Basically, I just said my name is Marcel and I'm living in Paris. Kind of the same thing. Neutral score. The key phrase is basically Marcel, which is living in Paris, right? So it can be all sorts of ways. Now, this is how it works. It's a really mere example. I told you that we're going to talk a bit about use cases as well, and the project that I've basically seen this happening. So most of the things in which I saw this exact solution, but of course a bit on steroids, is usually in customer service centers, right? So imagine a customer service center in which usually, of course, all of the conversations that an agent from that customer service center is having with a customer, it usually is being recorded, and of course it's being analyzed for feedback by some upper managers at some point. That constantly happens in customer service centers, right? Now, I know a couple of companies which in the past 2 years, I cannot say the name, of course, sorry for that, but which have implemented the solution just like this, right? In which they do this exact thing. They basically get the recorded calls because they record it with some specific tool that they have, right? They send it for analysis in Azure through some application that they built. They get back all the speech to text, and that really helps because you basically have all the logs of what has been spoken into that conversation. You can also apply tags to it. They also apply tag to that specific conversation because they can easily find out with the key entity recognition that you just saw that the customer was speaking about the problem of his phone, or the customer was speaking about the problem about the network or whatever, right? So it's really easy to apply tags once you have the key phrase entity, right? And beyond that, of course, with sentiment analysis, they can do a pre-analysis more or less of finding out which customer call went a bit badly than what it was supposed to be, right? So if the conversation usually has kind of a negative feedback on the text, right, over 20% or over 25% or so on and so forth, then it might be, of course, that some upper manager or supervisor might want to hear that as well to see what exactly happened there because the customer is presumably not really happy with it, right? That's one of the use cases. So I've seen that in the full glory of what you've seen at the moment, right? Exactly this speech to text, and then that text being analyzed. It's actually happening in customer service calls, customer service centers at the moment, right? And I've also seen from a customer satisfaction perspective, more and more companies which are basically scanning their web pages, their Facebook pages, their Twitter pages, their social media pages, basically for text, and doing, of course, this sentiment analysis on it, right? So in case people start complaining on their web page or Facebook page or whatever, there's a little bot in the back end, right, for several companies, which constantly scans new posts on that page to see what's the exact dissatisfaction or satisfaction of the customer, right? And based on that, the company can get really valuable insights, like how good the products are, what are the people complaining actually about the company or about the specific product, and so on and so forth. So all of this data can be now analyzed kind of automatically, more or less, if you think about the right business case. So I've seen that actually happening nowadays with the help of artificial intelligence. Cool. We have kind of 10 minutes left, so we're a bit ahead of schedule, but no problem for that. I'm going to leave you guys to ask questions in case you have them, right? Of course. So I'm going to allow 2, 3, 4 minutes of questions, and then we'll take it from there, I guess.
Perfect. Thank you so much for this talk. This was really interesting. I love also that you can see that you're learning Spanish of Duolingo, because it's always like, yo como manzanas is like, I think, one of the first sentences that you learn. So I thought that was really funny. And also how you assume different characters when you're apparently like Spanish and French. And I would love to hear Marcel's story.
I'm sure
as the French version of you. So I had a good laugh about that. I hope the audience did too. The stream is a little bit behind, so let's give people a little bit of time to potentially get their questions in. It's also the end of the conference day, so maybe people are out of questions. We don't know. I would love to know from you, when using this technology, what is maybe the silliest use case that you've seen versus what is the most useful use case that you've seen?
I'm going to start with the most useful one, more or less, which is kind of related to what I just said earlier. So all of that analysis on social media and so on and so forth is actually happening in one of European government in my country, actually in Romania. So the government is currently working with similar technologies. Artificial intelligence is not necessarily from Microsoft, but any cloud or any provider of artificial intelligence can basically do the same, in which they want to analyze the full internet. I don't know how exactly they are doing that, but kudos to that. To hear people's opinion about the government and about the problems that are in the country, which it's kind of useful, more or less, right? So if people start complaining about, I know, we don't have enough roads in one city, or we don't have, I know, enough whatever, right? That certain application, that certain bot can actually scan through all of the messages on the internet, and of course can actually report it to some government official. Look, these are the real problems that you want to take care of. Now, don't imagine it's kind of a policing government. It doesn't happen with all the internet. There are actually some guidelines in which the government kind of gave when they implemented this project, saying that if you ever want to complain about something on the internet, please put this hashtag so that we can recognize it, right? So it's only on messages that you want to be recognized. It's not on the whole freaking thing, right? Okay. That's one of them. So that's pretty useful. That's useful. Silliest one. I don't know if it counts to silly, but I didn't really saw the use case at that point, like from a business perspective. Yeah. I had a customer once, which was basically a pharmacy, a company which were having a lot of pharmacies in a specific part of the world. I'm not going to tell you about that. And they were doing the following thing. It's a bit related to speech to text, but you can do the sentiment analysis. You can do it on faces as well. So I'm going behind the subject that we currently have, but imagine that this analysis, you can do it also for other things, like, of course, face recognition, as well, right? And the use case was the following. You enter the pharmacy, somebody scans your face. It was in a part of a world where you can actually do that legally, of course. The pharmacy scans your face with some, of course, camera, whatever, to see if you're happy, sad, whatever. And then when you leave the pharmacy, it scans again your face to see if your customer satisfaction improved. And I was like, that's not a point. I mean, it can happen literally everything between your first scan and your second scan. It can, you can have I don't know, a bad news in between, and it will basically not be relevant. But oh well, the customer wanted it, so I saw that happening at a certain point. It was pretty unusual.
That is an unusual one. Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing. And indeed, like I love the disclaimer that that's in a country where they can do that because opinions. All right. I don't see any questions coming in, so I'm assuming everyone is getting ready for the closing keynote. I hope you will join us for that one too. Thank you so much for your talk. There's a siren going off outside. I don't know if you've heard that. Sorry, distracted. Thank you so much, Catalin. It was really, really interesting to hear from you, and a wonderful demo. And now I feel like inspired also to get back to learning Spanish, which is wasn't not the intention of your talk, but is maybe a happy side effect. I don't know.
Well, I'm happy about that. So yeah, thank you for having me, and again, enjoy the rest of the day, everybody.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you, guys.
This is all we got. Remember the revolution in our minds. This is all we got.
Lock me out of this life institution. I am angry and high on illusions. Yes, I hate, but it's not a solution. Try my best, but I'm just a human. Oh, we don't need to say we're sorry. We don't need to worship ever start. We don't need to say